Black patriarch.
Another theme that you discuss in Wealth, Poverty, and Politics, inequality. Quote, once we put production at the center of our attention, our surprise at extremes of income and wealth, rich people, rich countries, poor countries, our surprise at extremes of income and wealth might suggest the question whether there are comparable extremes in the production of wealth and whether these two extremes may have something to do with each other. Setting the possession of wealth aside to focus on the production of wealth. And that is intellectually more fruitful if you really want to know why some people are poor and some people are rich. That's
Absolutely. One of the painful things, I came from an earlier era when we were taught, that the reason we have electric lights is because of Thomas Edison. And the reason people can now afford cars, whereas 100 years ago, 1% of the American families had a car, is because Henry Ford figured out how to make cars a lot cheaper. And various other things, we understood that. You never hear that these days. All you hear is that somebody is rich somehow, that for some reason, like it dropped out of the sky or something. And it's true, Bill Gates has more money than I guess some countries. But of course, he created more than some countries. But at the very least, you can ask the question. And you can find out maybe that wasn't true of others, maybe it wasn't true. Yeah. But the fact is that question is kept off the table in most discussions now. They act as if somehow this guy has all this money, and as if it's almost as if you're implicitly assuming a fixed amount of wealth in the world. And if he has more, somebody else must have less.
And what they need to understand, you need to understand what are the habits that lead to production. Correct?
Yes, the question is, why is there wealth in the first place before we get into the question of how it's distributed? Because if there's no wealth, there's nothing to distribute.
Okay, all right. Staying with inequality for just a moment, because it's such a big theme in the current electoral cycle. Once again, Wealth, Poverty, and Politics. Quote, the welfare state, which, by the way, is the recourse of virtually everybody who's concerned about inequality. Let's redistribute from the rich to the poor. Fine, so we expand the welfare state. And you argue, quote, the welfare state reduces the incentives to develop human capital, and receiving the products of other people's human capital, that is getting money from the rich if you're poor, is by no means as fundamental as developing one's own human capital, close quote. What is human capital, and why does the welfare state suppress the incentives to develop it?
Well, human capital is the ability to create the material things that constitute wealth. People have been puzzled by the fact for a long time that after a major war with huge destruction, once peace is restored, the economy gets restored often in a very few years. I think Western Europe after World War II, everything that was there was bombed, and they wonder why. How can that be? And John Stuart Mill explained this back in the middle of the 19th century, that the material things are going to be used up and wear out, whether there's a war or not. And so it's really the ability to reproduce, to operate those things, to maintain them, and then reproduce them was necessary. That's the real wealth. And so when you destroy the physical wealth, you really haven't done as much as if you destroyed the human capital. A classic example, in the 1970s, Uganda decided that the Gujaratis from India were just too wealthy and controlled too much of the economy. They sent them out and they wouldn't let them take their wealth with them. And so the Gujaratis arrived, mostly in England, destitute. And the Ugandan government has taken over all this material stuff. Over a period of a relatively few years, the Gujaratis were prosperous in England and the Ugandan economy collapsed because they didn't have people who could do what the Gujaratis were doing, and so they no longer had the same production. It's also one of the problems with trying to finance things by confiscating the wealth of the wealthy. All you can confiscate is the material wealth. You cannot confiscate the human capital.
So the true wealth, the enduring wealth, the wealth that leads to wealth in the material world is between people's ears.
Absolutely.